There is an invisible operator, active inside your physical body right now. It never takes a break, and it never shuts down. It continues functioning while you digest this exact sentence, while you swipe through notifications on your screen, and while you stare blankly at your bedroom ceiling at 3 in the morning, unable to drift off. Here is the unsettling reality. You did not construct it, and you certainly did not write its original programming. Worse yet, the vast majority of people navigate their entire existence without ever figuring out how to manage it. That hidden engine is your subconscious mind. Drawing from the insights of Joseph Murphy, a researcher who spent decades analyzing the direct bridge between deep-seated belief and outer results, this internal mechanism is far from neutral. It sits passively by. Instead, it is actively dictating the state of your bank balance, the health of your connections with others, your physical well-being, and your personal boundary of what feels achievable. It does all of this based on directions you handed over years ago, most of which you cannot even consciously recall. Over the course of the next few minutes, we are going to dismantle that engine. We won't do this by reciting boring textbook pages, but by walking through the core concepts behind the influence of your subconscious mind. Everything will be broken down into clear, everyday language, backed by practical, real-world examples showing how the mechanics function, allowing you to begin shifting your internal programming starting tonight. Make sure you stick around until the final breakdown, because the closing section outlines the single method Murphy regarded as the absolute strongest tool in the entire framework, and it requires less than 5 minutes right before you drift off to sleep. Let's dive in. Section 1. 2 distinct minds, 1 single roof. To make sense of this framework, you first have to grasp a fundamental truth. You do not possess just one unified mind. You actually have 2 distinct intelligences operating under the same roof, and they handle completely different workloads. The first is your conscious mind. This is the exact aspect of your consciousness processing these words right now. It weighs options, questions premises, compares scenarios, and makes active choices. It tells you things like, "That claim sounds doubtful," or "Let me analyze that further before I decide." Behavioral experts often refer to this part as the gatekeeper, because its primary duty is screening incoming data to determine what gets allowed past the barrier. The second intelligence is your subconscious mind, and this specific layer operates with almost zero protective filter. It refuses to argue with you. It never pauses to judge whether a concept is beneficial or damaging, accurate or completely false. Its singular purpose is to accept whatever message gets firmly and repeatedly impressed upon it, and then work relentlessly, day and night, to turn that mental imprint into your physical reality. An easy way to visualize this is through the dynamic between a farmer and the earth. Your conscious mind acts as the farmer. It decides which seeds to purchase and drop into the ground. Your subconscious mind acts as the dirt. The soil holds zero preference over whether you drop carrot seeds or invasive weeds into its rows. It will cultivate whatever seed you introduce with absolute dedication, unyielding commitment, and zero moral judgment regarding whether your choice made logical sense Consider a real-world scenario that highlights this dynamic clearly. Picture two individuals starting out in identical entry-level positions on the exact same day, equipped with the exact same baseline skill set. The first person grew up in a household where a parent constantly muttered, "Our family never catches a break. People like us just scrape by to survive." The second person was raised by a caregiver who instilled a different viewpoint. Whatever goal you set your focus on, you will always find a path to make it happen. Fast forward 5 years into the future. The initial employee has been handed two distinct opportunities for advancement and turned both of them down flat. A deep-seated sense of imposter syndrome flared up inside them every time leadership roles came up for discussion. As a result, they convinced themselves the timing was never quite right. Meanwhile, the second employee, who started with no extra talent and no distinct structural advantage, has already requested a pay bump twice and secured it both times, simply because advocating for themselves never triggered a deep sense of internal danger. Nothing in their external environment created that chasm. The soil of their minds had simply been planted with opposing seeds long before either of them ever swiped their badge at work. That single dynamic forms the core thesis of this entire philosophy. The outcomes manifesting in your daily life are rarely a direct reflection of your raw talent. Instead, they act as a printout of whatever messages were repeatedly stamped onto your subconscious mind, frequently without your conscious permission, and often before you were even old enough to understand what programming was taking place. The encouraging takeaway, and the focus of the remainder of Murphy's work, is that soil holds no emotional attachment to its past crop. You have the power to plant entirely new seeds starting today. The earth will foster those new inputs with that same uncompromised dedication it previously gave to old limiting beliefs. Section 2. The Law of Belief. It is not what you think, but what you feel. This is precisely where most individuals trip over these concepts, making it a critical point to slow down and examine closely. This framework does not argue that simply forcing positive thoughts into your head will automatically magnetize good fortunes toward you. That represents a very surface-level interpretation of a much more precise mechanism that Murphy defines as the law of belief. The law operates according to a specific rule. Your subconscious mind remains entirely indifferent to mere spoken words. It responds strictly to what you emotionally and fundamentally accept as absolute truth. You can stand in front of your bathroom mirror, reciting, "I am filled with unwavering confidence," 1,000 times over. But if a deeper layer of your psyche rejects that statement, if your shoulders instantly tense up and your stomach drops with a sense of falseness, your subconscious will always defer to your visceral gut reaction rather than your spoken sentence. A well-documented phenomenon across the medical world illustrates this principle clearly, and it has nothing to do with standard positive affirmations. It is known as the placebo effect. In clinical trials, when patients are handed a plain sugar pill, but a trusted physician tells them with absolute conviction that it will eliminate their physical agony, those patients frequently report and experience genuine, measurable pain reduction. Their physical brains genuinely release natural analgesic chemistry. Yet, the pill itself contained 0 active medical components. The catalyst that shifted the physical body was entirely the patient's deep-rooted conviction that a powerful intervention was taking place. Now, look at the reverse side of that coin. Medical science has equally documented the nocebo effect, where individuals told that a completely harmless substance might induce sickness actually begin experiencing acute nausea, despite the capsule containing 0 chemical properties that would cause it. The physical body is identical. The capsule is identical. But the outcome flips completely because the underlying belief inverted. This serves as the foundational operating code of the subconscious mind, manifesting inside a clinical setting, rather than your professional career or personal relationships. It cannot differentiate between an objective external reality and a deeply internalized mental conviction. It simply executes the program. Consider a non-medical parallel that hits closer to home. Imagine someone navigating a stressful job hunt, following an unexpected corporate layoff. They fire off 50 tailored applications. The first 10 submissions yield absolute silence, and somewhere inside that quiet rejection window, a permanent conviction locks into place. Nobody actually wants me. I am fundamentally damaged goods. They would never voice those words out loud to a friend. But look closely at what happens during interview number 11. Their handshake loses its firmness. Their tone drops a notch in conviction. They inadvertently downplay a major professional win they would normally highlight with pride. Now, picture a second candidate going through the exact same ordeal. They experience the identical streak of 50 rejections, but instead latch on to a different mental frame. This is purely a numbers game, and my ideal professional match just hasn't appeared yet. They faced the exact same run of bad luck, yet they bring a completely different physical presence into the interview chair. That is the law of belief manifesting in real time. Success is dictated not by the raw facts of a situation, but by the silent sentence your subconscious mind quietly chooses to accept as truth regarding those facts. Section 3. How an input transforms into an outcome. If the subconscious mind accepts whatever you profoundly believe and then orchestrates your reality to match it, how does that sequence play out mechanically? Murphy's explanation is that the subconscious functions like an advanced autopilot system. It constantly guides your micro-decisions, the small choices you make without conscious thought, straight toward whatever narrative it has accepted as absolute reality, all without you ever realizing you are being steered. Think back to the period when you first learned how to drive a car. During your initial lessons behind the wheel, checking side mirrors, modulating the gas pedal, and keeping the steering wheel steady demanded 100% of your intense, exhausting, conscious focus. Fast forward 12 months, and you can easily maintain a complex conversation with a passenger while navigating traffic, occasionally realizing you cannot even recall the past 5 miles of your commute. That driving skill did not evaporate into thin air. It simply migrated. It was handed off from the effort-heavy conscious mind over to the automated subconscious processing unit, which now manages the entire operation seamlessly in the background without needing constant supervision. That exact same handoff happens with deep-seated assumptions surrounding personal wealth, romantic relationships, and self-worth. Once a concept is thoroughly embraced, it stops requiring active mental energy. It simply runs in the background of your psyche, quietly steering your micro-choices throughout every waking hour. Let's look at a vivid illustration of this mechanism. 2 independent entrepreneurs launch competing coffee shops on opposite corners of the same commercial street. One grew up absorbing the steady narrative that money is the root of endless stress, and that wealthy individuals are never truly content. The other was raised with the belief that capital is simply a neutral tool that rewards individuals who successfully solve genuine problems for others. Observe how differently their internal autopilots steer them. The first owner, without ever consciously mapping out a self-sabotage strategy, prices their specialty drinks slightly too low to cover operational costs fairly, refuses to raise prices even as supply expenses spike, feels a heavy wave of guilt every single time the daily register surges, and habitually overhires staff because turning down anyone asking for work triggers intense emotional discomfort. 18 months down the road, they are utterly exhausted and barely breaking even, wondering why achieving financial traction feels like pushing a boulder uphill. Meanwhile, the second owner confidently scales up pricing the moment supplier costs climb, reinvests business profits back into growth without experiencing anxiety, and negotiates commercial contracts firmly because the act of moving money back and forth triggers 0 internal alarm bells. Same neighborhood, identical coffee quality, identical macroeconomic conditions, yet they produce two entirely divergent trajectories, steered entirely by an internal autopilot. Neither of them actively tracks on a conscious level. This reality explains why relying on sheer willpower alone so frequently crumbles when trying to alter life outcomes. You cannot out-muscle an autopilot system when the steering coordinates are already hard-coded into the flight computer. According to this framework, you must reprogram the autopilot mechanism itself, which brings us directly to the core technique covered next. Section 4. The sleep technique. Reprogramming while the guard is down. If the subconscious layer dictates the direction of your life quietly in the background, how do you inject fresh, upgraded instructions into its system? Murphy is exceptionally precise on this point, and this stands out as the most actionable segment of the entire methodology. The subconscious mind opens its doors widest during two specific windows: right before you fall asleep and immediately upon waking up. These are the drowsy, twilight states where the protective filtering mechanisms of the conscious mind temporarily lose their sharpness. Think of it like trying to bypass security at a restricted facility. Throughout the bustling hours of the day, your conscious mind acts like a strict bouncer stationed at the front entrance of your belief system, carding every single incoming idea, cross-examining its validity, and frequently turning concepts away at the door. Suppose you try to tell yourself during a stressful afternoon, "I feel completely at ease managing large financial portfolios." Your mental bouncer instantly steps in. Negative. That doesn't align with your bank balance history. Access denied. However, when you slip into that drowsy, heavy-lidded state right before sleep descends, that bouncer gets exhausted and starts waving people through the turnstiles without checking identification cards nearly as carefully. That is your operational window. The technique itself is deceptively straightforward. In those final minutes before consciousness fades, instead of mindlessly scrolling through social media feeds or rehashing the day's frustrations, you deliberately construct a specific, emotionally charged mental snapshot of the exact outcome you desire. You do not frame it as a distant wish or a hopeful prayer, but as a reality that is already true. You focus not on, "I hope I nail this presentation," but on the physical, felt sensation of having already succeeded. Notice the physical markers, the steady cadence of your voice during the meeting, the looseness in your shoulder muscles, and the quiet self-assurance you feel answering difficult questions from skeptics. Compare this directly against what the average person defaults to at bedtime. Picture an individual facing a major, high-stakes corporate presentation the following morning. What is their typical nightly routine They lie flat in the dark, mentally replaying every catastrophic way the event could crash and burn. They imagine forgetting a crucial data point, freezing up under a hostile question they cannot answer, and looking out across a room full of frowning, unimpressed executives. They drift off to sleep after spending 20 uninterrupted minutes rehearsing absolute failure in vivid, felt detail. Remember how the subconscious operates. It possesses zero capacity to differentiate between a vividly rehearsed fear and an actual lived memory. It accepts that mental impression at face value and quietly programs the physical body to execute that exact state tomorrow. The result? A constricted throat, shallow, panicked breathing, and the exact stumble they spent hours dreading. Now contrast that with someone deploying the proper mental technique instead. They faced the identical presentation and felt the exact same career nerves earlier in the day. But at bedtime, they redirect those exact 20 minutes entirely. They visualize the boardroom unfolding smoothly, actively feeling, not merely picturing, the physical ease of delivering a brilliant response to a harsh inquiry. They imagine the quiet, satisfied exhale as they pack up their laptop afterward. They are not lying to themselves about the external challenge ahead. They are simply choosing which specific seed gets planted during the one daily window when planting requires the least amount of resistance. It requires the exact same 20 minutes either way, but it yields a completely different harvest. This is not New Age mystical thinking about the cosmos rearranging itself to suit your whims. It represents a mechanical understanding of how human subconscious processing absorbs impressions, and how weeks of consistent repetition transform into relaxed body posture, a steady vocal tone, and decisive action, which naturally creates the real-world results you are looking for. Section 5. Resetting your internal wealth thermostat. Let's apply these mechanics directly to an area where nearly everyone harbors a complicated subconscious history: money. Murphy contends that an individual's financial ceiling has virtually nothing to do with shifting market conditions, and almost everything to do with an invisible upper limit their subconscious mind has accepted as the maximum amount appropriate for someone like me. Visualize this ceiling through a simple household analogy. A thermostat locked firmly at 68 degrees. You can prop open all the windows, crank up a high-powered space heater, or try everything within your power to push the room climate higher. The moment the ambient temperature creeps toward 70 degrees, the central system kicks back on and pulls the climate right down to 68. The system isn't fighting you out of malice or anger. It is simply doing its programming, maintaining the exact setting it was given. Personal income frequently behaves with that exact thermal consistency. Consider someone who experiences a sudden financial windfall, an unexpected inheritance, a lucrative tech investment payout, or a major corporate bonus, whose internal money thermostat was hard-coded to a low setting during childhood. Within a brief window of a year or two, documented case studies show that money frequently vanishes. It leaks out through unnecessary home renovations, questionable loans extended to relatives that are never returned, or poorly timed business ventures. This happens not because the person is inherently reckless, but because holding a financial volume higher than their internal setting feels deeply uncomfortable, unfamiliar, and unnatural, almost like wearing a heavy coat that belongs to a stranger. True to its programming, the subconscious mind quietly tracks down a mechanism to force the temperature back to its familiar baseline. Compare that pattern to an individual who expands their earning capacity gradually over a decade through steady, ordinary professional steps. Somehow, they manage to retain and compound their gains, even through severe economic downturns and market corrections. The differentiator is rarely superior financial genius. It simply stems from the fact that their internal wealth thermostat was calibrated to a higher baseline from the start. Consequently, holding larger sums of capital fails to trigger any unconscious panic or corrective self-sabotage. The practical takeaway here is that standard budgeting tricks and exhausting side hustles, while helpful, are merely tinkering with the room's temporary air currents. The permanent fix requires upgrading the thermostat itself. You achieve this by utilizing that exact bedtime framing technique detailed earlier, targeting the physical, felt sense of comfort surrounding wealth, surrounding wake. You cultivate a feeling of calm, rather than giddy excitement or underlying panic, when mentally picturing the precise financial figures you want to establish as your new normal. Section 6. Forgiveness as technical maintenance. One of the more unexpected assertions found within this framework involves the concept of forgiveness, and it deserves unpacking because it is frequently misunderstood. Murphy does not frame forgiveness primarily as a moral obligation or a polite favor you extend to someone who wronged you. Instead, he presents it as essential technical maintenance for your own mental machinery. Here is the operational reason why. Every single time you mentally replay an old grievance, an ex-partner who betrayed your trust, a manager who publicly humiliated you, or a parent who let you down during childhood, you are, from a mechanical standpoint, feeding your subconscious mind a fresh, emotionally supercharged instruction set unit. Your psyche does not file that memory away with a helpful label like ancient history, just reviewing data. It treats a vividly resurrected resentment as a live, active command. It processes the grievance with the exact same physiological intensity it would apply to any other repeated, emotionally dense thought pattern. Picture two individuals navigating life several years after undergoing the exact same painful divorce. The first person can mention their former spouse's name in passing conversation with roughly the same emotional neutrality as discussing tomorrow's weather forecast. Not because they are pretending the split was painless, but because they stopped actively feeding the memory loop years prior. The second person still cannot hear that name uttered without feeling their chest tighten into a knot, even while sitting at a social gathering surrounded by people entirely unconnected to their past marriage. Here is the realization that catches many people off guard. It is not the second person's ex who is currently causing them physical and emotional distress. That former partner has long since moved on, remarried, and given zero thought to the matter. The daily mental replay loop itself is the active mechanism inflicting the damage. It is an old wound being kept wide open through self-administered mental impressions, years after the physical event concluded. Because thoughts carry chemical weight, the subconscious mind cannot tell the difference between "this happened once a decade ago" and "this is actively happening to me right now." If the memory is replayed with identical fury each time, this completely reframes the utility of forgiveness. It is not about condoning bad behavior or forcing a reconciliation with someone toxic. It is about cutting off a self-inflicted, repetitive command loop that keeps an old resentment metabolically and emotionally burning inside your biological system long after the actual conflict has ended. Releasing that grip frees up critical subconscious processing power to work on goals you actually care about, rather than burning energy running maintenance on ancient scar tissue on autopilot. Section 7. Bringing it all together into a daily protocol. Let's ground all of these mechanics into a practical routine you can start implementing tonight. First, recognize that your subconscious mind is neither an adversary to be feared nor a mystical force. It functions much like an exceptionally powerful, literal-minded employee that has simply been running on outdated software instructions, some of which were installed before you were old enough to evaluate their validity. Second, keep the law of belief at the forefront of your strategy. Words spoken out loud hold little weight compared to what you truly accept as an emotional reality. Forced affirmations you secretly doubt are just white noise. A genuine, quiet felt sense acts as a concrete instruction. Third, leverage the twilight windows. The moments immediately preceding sleep and following waking represent your best operational openings because the usual mental filters drop. That is when a fresh mental impression secures a foothold, exactly how it worked for the successful presenter, the thriving business owner, and the person who recalibrated their internal wealth thermostat. Fourth, do not neglect basic psychological maintenance. Pursuing ambitious new life goals while an old resentment drains your energy in the background is like trying to fill a swimming pool with the main drain left wide open. Addressing what is currently exhausting your mental reserves. will often yield higher returns than stacking another heavy objective onto an already leaking system. None of these practices require subscribing to mystical beliefs. They simply require taking seriously the operational reality that a vital portion of your mind is constantly listening, constantly executing, and drawing its marching orders from whatever messages you repeated to it the longest and loudest. And starting with the next few moments before your head hits the pillow tonight, you hold the power to decide what message it hears next.